island where time stood still. The people of the pouring. Scandinavia is not just about the profiles of fjords cutting into the sky or the harsh northern winds. It is a land of epics whose words are etched forever into cold Scandinavian stone. But if you stray from the well-trodden tourist paths of mainland Sweden and cross 100 kilometers of the turbulent Baltic Sea, you will encounter a place that seems to have fallen out of the linear flow of time. This is Gotland. As the largest island in the Swedish kingdom, it rises from the sea depths like a sleeping giant, a body sculpted from Silurian limestone that remembers the very dawn of time. This island is a true arc of history. Every patch of its land seems saturated with salt and memories of those who first set foot on these shores. The name Gotland is more than just a geographic tag on a map. It is an echo of a forgotten ancient Germanic language lost in the twilight of millennia. The word Gura or Goth is a true linguistic puzzle. According to one of the most popular theories, it stems from an ancient root meaning to pour or to shed. Why? Researchers still argue, seeking answers in the mists of the past. Some see a direct nod to the ancient islanders' mastery of metallurgy. Imagine molten metal flowing from a furnace forging weapons that would change the course of history. Others, more inclined toward mythology, interpret it as a metaphor for masculine power, pouring its fury into an unstoppable flow of battle. There is an ancient legend of the blood of the earth, which claims that the Gura mariners received their name not because of iron, but for their ability to pour their lives into the water while traveling into the unknown. They believed that every drop of their sweat falling into the Baltic turned into stone, shaping the shores of their native island. They were not just a people, they were a part of the landscape itself, eternally bound to the sea. So Gotland is not merely a plot of land in the middle of the sea. It is a place where the very language, the very name of its people, those who pour, becomes the key to understanding their nature. Restless, dangerous, and inextricably linked to fire, steel, and the endless ocean. The myth of origin, a kingdom born from the abyss. In ancient sagas passed down for centuries amidst the roar of northern storms, the Gura were often called the people who emerged from the sea. This was not merely a metaphor. For the ancestors of the Gotlanders, the sea was not just a path, but the very womb in which their culture was born. Local legends living in the island's memory claim that Gotland was never part of the mainland. It was nurtured by the gods themselves as a special gift. According to the most ancient beliefs, the Baltic Sea was once so wrathful and restless that it swallowed everything in its path. The gods, watching the courageous people desperately fighting for survival in their boats, decided to intervene. They raised the island from the very bottom of the abyss, tearing it from the stone hands of the ocean to create a refuge, a fortress that no wrath of the world's oceans could destroy. That is why the name Gotland is not just a piece of land. It is a sacred kingdom born of water, possessing its own eternal magic, inaccessible to other lands. Over the centuries, this name, like a living organism, constantly changed, adapting to the course of history. It passed through thousands of mouths, was carved onto the cold runic stones of the Vikings as Gotlanti, transformed into the majestic Latin Gotlandia in medieval monks' manuscripts, and even underwent the influence of foreign tongues. Even the modern name Gotland, which we are used to today, is merely an echo of strong Low German influence that came to Sweden along with trade and new trends. Interestingly, for a long time the island searched for its ideal form. Until the early 1920s, it was written with 2 T letters, Gotland, as if attempting to emphasize the strength and solidity of its roots. Only on November 12, 1923, following a government decision based on statistical census data, was the spelling we know today finally established. It has been a long journey from the mystical runes of the Vikings to the dry language of state documents, but the essence of the island has remained unchanged. It always was and remains a child of the sea and the gods. Geography of eternity, the land where Earth meets the abyss. Gotland is not just a tract of land, it is a truly austere plateau that seems frozen in expectation of eternity. Here you will not find sharp mountain peaks piercing the clouds or breathtaking canyons. Instead, the island greets you with the calm but commanding majesty of Silurian limestone and sandstone, which formed deep underwater for millions of years before becoming the rocky foundation of this land. This plateau, covering an area of 2994 square kilometers, is the largest island in Sweden, surrounded by smaller satellites such as Farö and Gotska Sandön. The island's surface is extremely restrained. Average altitudes fluctuate only within the range of 30–50 meters. The island's highest point, Lodgsta Head, rises 83 meters above sea level. It may seem like very little, but try to find yourself there during a fierce Baltic storm. When the salty wind tries to knock you off your feet and the sky merges with the foamy waves, you suddenly realize, at that moment, you are not on a lowland but on a true roof of the world, where the elements dictate their own laws. The heart of this stone land is Visby, a city rightfully called the City of Roses and Ruins. This unique place is the only true medieval center that has miraculously preserved its authentic aura through the centuries. Walking along the narrow streets of Visby, you feel the air change around you. Among the high defensive walls that remember the footsteps of medieval merchants, history ceases to be just a set of dates in a textbook. It becomes thick, a substance almost tangible to the touch with which you fill your lungs. Local residents say that Gotland has a special power of grounding, a sense of the roof of the world. The limestone plateaus upon which ancient churches stand absorb every thunderstorm, which is why after a storm the air here becomes crystal clear. Standing on the Lodgsta Head plateau, you see only the endless line of the horizon where the sea and sky become one. This feeling of isolation and majesty at the same time is the true geography of Gotland, a place where the earth seems to have finally found peace after the creation of the world. The ram with a flag, the mystical guardian of Gotland. If your gaze falls upon the official coat of arms of Gotland, you will see an unusually proud ram carrying a flag. To an outsider, this may seem like a mere sophisticated heraldic whim or a strange choice for a province's symbol. However, for the islanders, it is much more than just a drawing on paper. It is a deep, almost sacred symbol that traces its roots to the 13th century and embodies the Christian image of the Lamb of God, purity, sacrifice, and divine protection. Interestingly, for centuries there were disputes surrounding this image. Was it a sheep or was it in fact a majestic ram? It was not until 1936 that official authorities finally solidified the creature's status as a ram, putting an end to the historical debates. The ancient Gura, whose lives were inextricably linked to the sea and the harsh climate, believed in a special kind of protection. According to legend, during the darkest times, when great plagues or ruthless famine came to the island, a snow-white ram with a shining golden flag would emerge from the thick Baltic mists. People believed that this was the Lamb of God himself descending to earth to save his people. He would walk slowly ahead of the exhausted settlers, leading them out of impassable thickets to hidden sources of fresh water where the people could find salvation. Since the 13th century, this image has become not just a part of history but a sacred talisman for all of Gotland. Locals say that this symbol possesses a living power. As long as the ram on the coat of arms proudly looks toward the sea, as if watching the horizon, Gotland will remain under the protection of higher powers and will be untouchable by any enemies. It is a belief that the island has its own spiritual shepherd, who never sleeps and is always ready to point the way to salvation, even when the situation seems hopeless. Island of treasures and stone comics of the past. Treasury of the Baltic Sea, a land that cannot stay silent. Gotland is not just a geographical point on a map, it is a gigantic treasure chest abandoned by the gods, which the harsh Baltic Sea has reliably protected and hidden for millennia. Every layer of soil here is a frozen fragment of history where reality intertwines with myth. When archaeologists' hands touch this earth, they are not merely digging up ancient artifacts, they are literally opening doors to a past that had been closed to humanity for thousands of years. The statistics impress even the most experienced scientists. Over 42,000 registered archaeological artifacts have been found on the island. These are not just isolated finds, but a truly rich cultural layer where every meter of land breathes with different eras, telling its own unique story. Why did Gotland become a treasury? The island was a natural crossroads of trade routes. Merchants traveling the Baltic considered Gotland the safest place to store wealth during long storms or raids. By burying their treasures in the ground, they believed it was the most reliable safe where gold and silver would be secure under the watchful eye of the island's spirits. Now, 1,000 years later, the Earth is gradually paying back these debts, turning the island into the largest open-air exhibition in Europe. Imagine this, walking through an ordinary field. You might not even suspect that beneath your feet lies history that has changed our understanding of Northern Europe's development. Here you will find everything, from primitive tools of seal hunters to exquisite jewelry that impresses even modern craftsmen with its skill. Each such item is not just a piece of metal or ceramics, it is someone's lost memory, someone's unfulfilled plan, or an offering brought to the gods to appease the sea before a long journey. Gotland is a land that does not know how to be silent, it only waits for someone capable of reading its stone language. From seal hunters to cave secrets, first steps into the unknown. Try for a moment to forget about luxurious Viking ships and majestic stone churches. Wind back the clock 9,000 years to a world where Gotland was merely a patch of rock fighting for existence amidst the icy, relentless waters of the Baltic. There were no knights in shining armor here, nor bustling trade routes. Only a primeval silence broken only by the roar of waves and the cries of seabirds. In this harsh world lived people, the first inhabitants of the island. They were courageous, seal hunters for whom every trip to sea could be their last. Their everyday life was a struggle for survival, where every catch was a matter of life and death. But even in this constant struggle, they found shelter that became their home and sanctuary. The island also features one of the ancient settlements, the Stora cave, which serves tourists like a portal to the past. Deep within the Stora cave on the island of Stora archaeologists stumbled upon a find that takes one's breath away, remains of daily life dating back 9,200 years old. These are not just bones or stones, they are evidence that these people already possessed a complex world of ideas. It was they who brought the mysterious Piridware culture to the island, and later the hybrid Kyukai's culture, which became a true bridge between different ways of life. What did these people leave for us? Pottery shards, which at first glance seem like ordinary trash, are true keys for modern science to understand their myths, culture, traditions, and worldview. Each pattern on these fragments, a pit or a comb, was not just decor but a specific code that spoke of their vision of the world, where the sea was a god and survival was the main ritual. They left these symbols on clay as if attempting to immortalize their presence in a world that was ready to erase their tracks at any moment. It was in these caves that the soul of Gotland was born, not in gold or kings, but in shards of simple clay that preserved millennia of silence. Rösa, sentinels that know no oblivion. If you set out on a journey through the vast expanses of Gotland, your gaze will inevitably be captured by strange, monumental stone mounds scattered across the entire island. Local residents call them Rösa or Rödra, which in the ancient Gutnish language means a cairn or mound. These are not merely piles of stones abandoned by time. They are grandiose Bronze Age barrows that have towered over the landscape for centuries, like silent sentinels guarding the forgotten secrets of ancient gods. The most magnificent among these stone giants is Ugard's Rö, located in the parish of Rhone. When you stand at its base, it is difficult to grasp how many thousands of tons of limestone were moved by human hands without any modern technology. It is not just a final resting place for the dead. It is a majestic symbol of the connection between the earthly and the heavenly. The Bronze Age people who erected these structures felt the pulse of the universe. They worshipped the sun that granted life and the wind that filled their sails. In many northern cultures, there was a belief that Rösa were not just graves, but a form of antenna connecting the world of the living with a higher dimension. It was believed that the stone structure of the barrow was capable of accumulating the energy of the elements, transforming the mound into a place of power. Local legends say that if you press yourself against the cold stones of a Rur during the equinox, you can hear the echoes of the songs of those who raised these mounds thousands of years ago. Across all of Gotland, we find hundreds of such barrows, which form a unique network that has yet to be fully studied by science. This is the island's true stone code. They tower above the fields, reminding us that civilizations come and go, but the stone remembers everything. Each Rur is testimony that the people of the Bronze Age had an astonishing sense of scale. They did not simply bury their ancestors. They created architectural monuments that challenged time itself, transforming the island's landscape into a sacred space where the sky touches the earth. The Spillings hoard, a silver key to the afterlife. Gotland's golden age is inextricably linked to the Viking Age, when the island transformed into the primary financial hub of Northern Europe. It was a crossroads where east met west, and wealth was measured not only in land but in the shimmer of silver. Archaeologists have uncovered over 650 hoards here, totaling a staggering 140,000 coins and pieces of jewelry. The most significant event in modern archaeology occurred in 1999 when the Earth returned the Spillings hoard to humanity. It consisted of 67 kilograms of pure silver that had waited in silence for 1,000 years. Legends suggest that this colossal treasure was more than just an accumulation of wealth. It was a sacred ransom paid to the gods for safe passage across the turbulent waters of the Baltic. Vikings, who believed in the power of the waves and the wrath of the sea gods, offered these gifts to prevent the sea from swallowing their ships. It is possible that the person who hid these 67 kilograms of silver never returned from their voyage, leaving their debt to the gods forever unpaid. However, the true soul of Gotland is revealed not in metal but in its picture stones. Researchers aptly call these unique monuments the ancient comics of the Vikings. They are covered in detailed depictions of sailing ships, crews with shields, and scenes from everyday life that come alive before one's eyes. These stones are not merely chronicles of events or lists of martial victories. Many feature carved scenes of journeys into the afterlife, into the mysterious world that opens after Ragnarok. The Vikings firmly believed that if one could manage to carve their life's path onto stone, their soul would never wander lost in the thick Baltic mists. These images are a way of speaking to us across the ages, warning that the end of the world is not a period, but merely a transition to a new cycle of existence. For them, stone was not just rock, but a means of achieving immortality, allowing the soul to find its way to the great halls. Lords of Baltic gold. For kings of Europe, an empire that needed no crowns. Medieval Gotland was not merely an island province, it was a true self-sufficient empire of free merchants whose influence stretched far beyond the Baltic Sea. Thanks to its unique strategic location, the Gotlanders held all the region's trade threads in their hands. While European monarchs squandered their treasuries in endless feudal wars, the inhabitants of Gotland built their prosperity on logistics and diplomacy, carving out reliable trade routes from distant Novgorod to the bustling markets of London. Have you ever wondered what defined the status of European nobility in the 12th century? The answer lay in the elegance of fur. The most coveted commodity in the royal courts of Europe was the winter fur of the grey squirrel, which Gotland merchants delivered directly from the forests around Novgorod. By holding a de facto monopoly on this good, as well as on beeswax, a strategic raw material without which the world of medieval cathedrals would have simply plunged into darkness, the Gotlanders became indispensable intermediaries in the global trade of that era. Their wealth was so staggering that it demanded embodiment in stone. The island turned into a gigantic construction site where the Gotlanders erected stone churches that, in their might, resembled impregnable fortresses more than temples. A total of 95 such majestic structures were built, each demonstrating the architectural ambitions of the local elite. This construction process lasted nearly 200 years, transforming the island's landscape into a true stone chronicle of wealth. Today, 92 of them are still in use, remaining silent witnesses to how the island became an integral part of the Christian world, having officially joined the Diocese of Linköping back in 1130. These churches became a symbol of a new era, where the Gotlanders did not simply trade with other peoples but actively absorbed European culture, turning their island into a center of civilization in the midst of the turbulent Baltic. It was a world where the stone of a church spoke of a merchant's power louder than the words of any king. The myth of golden treasures, why Gotland's earth refuses to yield its wealth. Gotlanders were so inextricably linked to their wealth that even the transition to Christianity, which brought new temples and a new morality, could not displace an old, deeply rooted habit burying gold and silver in the earth. Today, archaeologists confirm this fact with staggering statistics. Over 700 individual hoards have been found on the island. But were these merely the bank safes of that time? Local legends suggest another, much deeper reason. According to tradition, this was not just an accumulation of capital for a rainy day. These were ritual offerings, a form of tax to the spirits of the earth and ancestors who, as the Gotlanders believed, protected their success in trade. By leaving a portion of their profits under the roots of ancient trees or in deep crevices of cliffs, merchants believed they were buying the favor of the forces of nature themselves, ensuring their luck would not run out. The figure of 140,000 recovered coins looks impressive, but scientists are certain this is just the tip of the iceberg. A vast amount of wealth still remains hidden under the tangled roots of ancient Gotland forests, in places people try to avoid. Many believe that treasures not reclaimed by their owners became part of the island itself. There is also a superstition that during moments when an especially thick fog rises over the island, the earth opens itself, allowing the chosen to see the glint of hidden silver. However, taking it means inviting a curse from whoever entrusted that treasure to the spirits. This strange mixture of the pragmatism of a trading people and a deep pagan fear of invisible forces makes the history of Gotland's treasures something greater than just archaeological finds. It is a story about people who learn to negotiate with the sky and the earth, attempting to hold on to wealth in a world where nothing is eternal except for the stone itself and the earth that accepts these sacrifices. Visby, from the silence of pilgrims to the roar of the Hanseric Wars. Visby did not emerge overnight. The city grew like a living organism, absorbing cultures, languages, and ambitions. At first, it was a modest, almost invisible port where German pilgrims would stop for a short rest on their long journey. However, the strategic importance of the harbor took its toll. Visby began to transform into a city of many peoples, as would later be written in the preamble to its city laws. Over time, German merchants became so influential there that Visby joined the powerful Hanseric League, becoming one of the key points on the map of European trade. But a high price had to be paid for this dizzying success. In a city that had become richer than entire kingdoms, a conflict was brewing that went far beyond mere trade disputes. Visby's success caused deep irritation in the rural areas of Gotland. Wealthy townspeople, often immigrants from other lands, and free Gotland farmers found themselves on opposite sides of the barricades. This was not just rivalry, it was a true civil war where the future of the island itself was at stake. Tensions reached their peak when big politics intervened. In 1313, Swedish King Birger I decided that the time had come to tame this rebellious island and bring it to its knees. He counted on a quick victory, relying on a disciplined army, but underestimated the spirit of the Gotland farmers. The royal army, which should have easily crushed the ignorant farmers, instead suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Röklingerbäki. The Gotlanders demonstrated that their will for independence was stronger than royal steel. The victory at Röklingerbäki was the pinnacle of Gotland's resistance, a brief moment of true freedom. However, looking back, we see that it was the beginning of the end. The political games surrounding the island became increasingly harsh, and Visby, having become too independent, attracted the attention of forces with which the island could no longer compete on its own. This was an era when Visby lived on a powder keg. On one side was blinding wealth, and on the other was the inevitable price for the right to be free in a world dominated by great unions and greedy monarchs. The beginning of the end when the sea turned black. However, no matter how bright history may be, even the wealthiest eras sooner or later faced their sunset. In the 14th century, the star of Gotland, which had shone over the Baltic for decades, began to fade inexorably. The world around it was changing. Lübeck was rapidly seizing the initiative, transforming into the main trade hub, and the former monopoly of Gotland merchants on eastern routes was definitively destroyed. But the real blow did not come from merchant competitors. In 1350, the Black Rider arrived on the island, the plague epidemic known as the Black Death. It was not just a pestilence, it was a catastrophe that claimed thousands of lives and placed a bold, bloody period at the end of the island's era of great prosperity. Old legends preserved the memory of the harbingers of the apocalypse, describing what occurred before the arrival of the disease. The sea around Gotland became thick and black like tar, scaring away even the most experienced fishermen. On the ancient Runic stones, which had remained undisturbed for centuries, a sticky moisture resembling human blood suddenly appeared. The island's inhabitants perceived these signs with horror. For them, it was an undeniable prophecy that the world they knew was approaching its finale. This sense of an inevitable end permeated all of society. When the disease began to mow down villages and towns, people believed it was not merely a natural disaster, but retribution for their pride and abandonment of ancient covenants. The island, once a symbol of wealth, turned into a place of sorrow where silence reigned in every home, and instead of ringing coins, only funeral bells echoed in the markets. This tragedy did not only bleed the island demographically, it finally undermined its economic power, making Gotland vulnerable to those who had been waiting for years for its fall. Pirate Haven and the Bloody Harvest. The island of pirates and exiled kings when gates open in fear. The 14th century turned Gotland into a true hell where each subsequent event was more horrific than the last. If the Black Death was an invisible enemy that arrived with the wind, then in 1361 a very real and tangible invader set foot on the island, the Danish king Valdemar Atterdag. His landing marked the beginning of the end for Gotland's independence. The battle beneath the walls of Visby will forever remain the darkest day in the island's history. About 2,000 peasants who lacked professional military training but were filled with desperate courage attempted to fight off the Danish professional army. It was an uneven fight where the steel of royal mercenaries met the fury of those defending their homes. The most horrific aspect of this tragedy was the stance of the Visby townspeople. They indifferently watched the slaughter from behind their high walls. When the peasant army was destroyed, the townspeople, driven by fear and greed, simply opened the gates to the Danes, hoping that royal mercy would preserve their privileges and wealth. This moment of betrayal became an unhealed wound in Gotland's historical memory, a brand of treason. The townspeople saved their houses, but forever lost the moral right to be called the proud defenders of the island. This event effectively put an end to Gotland's role as an independent force in the Baltic. After this, the island turned into a passing banner, constantly snatched back and forth by kings, regents, and adventurers. By 1394, Gotland had fallen into the hands of the Vitalian brothers, a legendary and fearsome pack of pirates who made the island their main base. The Baltic Sea, which had once been a path for merchants, became a zone of terror where these brothers intercepted ships and dictated their will to everyone around them. The island, where the fur trade once flourished, became a refuge for brigands who knew nothing but the power of the sword and the glint of looted gold. The myth of the Vitalian ghosts, the curse of the Baltic Sea. The pirate era of Gotland left behind not only destroyed ports but also grim legends that still frighten local fishermen to this day. It is said that the Vitalian brothers were not merely robbers, they sought what was hidden deeper than gold, ancient artifacts concealed within the ruins of partially destroyed churches. They believed that the keys to the power that could subjugate the entire Baltic were hidden in these sacred places. The most famous legend tells of a stormy night when pirates besieged an old coastal monastery, hoping to find treasures rumored among the sailors. As soon as they broke down the gates, the sea suddenly rose to the heavens and a massive wave covered the entire coastline. Since then, sailors often see the silhouettes of their ships in the thick Baltic fog, illuminated by an unnatural, ghostly light, a warning to everyone who comes to Gotland with a sword rather than in peace. After the era of pirate chaos, the island became an unexpected refuge for the deposed Swedish King Eric of Pomerania. He turned Visborg Castle into his final impregnable citadel from where he attempted to regain his former glory. However, Gotland no longer belonged to a single person. The island turned into a bargaining chip that Denmark and Sweden mercilessly tore from each other, constantly redrawing the borders and the fates of its inhabitants. Visborg Castle became a symbol of political exile, where kings awaited their chance, watching a sea that was no longer under their control. Constant changes in power turned life on Gotland into an endless struggle for survival, where trust in rulers was a luxury that no one could afford. This was a time when Gotland once again became a toy in the hands of the powerful of this world, but it was precisely during this period that the island definitively cemented its reputation as a place where human ambitions shatter against the power of nature and ancient curses. The burning of Visby and the long road to peace, when empires divided Gotland. The year 1525 became another act of tragedy for Gotland that forever changed its appearance. A fleet from Lubeck seeking to destroy a competitor attacked Visby, turning the flourishing city into ashes. A significant portion of its medieval buildings were burned and plundered. This event drew a line under an era of relative stability and began a long period of instability. Until 1645, the island remained an arena of fierce political and military confrontations, until it was finally officially transferred to Sweden under the terms of the Treaty of Brömsebro. However, even joining the Swedish crown did not bring long-awaited peace to Gotland. The island continued to remain a strategic hub claimed by major powers. The political ambitions of the major players in the Baltic region once again made Gotland vulnerable to external invasions. During the Russo-Swedish War of 1808-1809, the island was captured by Russian troops. For a short time, Russia declared Gotland its province, which became another ordeal for the island's inhabitants, who were already tired of the constant changes of flags over Visby. Despite the destruction of Visby and numerous occupations, Gotland endured. The island's residents learned to live under conditions of constant changes in power, preserving their identity amidst the wreckage of former greatness. Every fire or occupation became merely a new layer in history, which made Gotland what we know it to be today, a place that has seen the fall of empires but has remained true to itself. The spirit of the island, why Gotland cannot be conquered. The history of Gotland is a 1,000-year drama where the lead characters changed, but the stage itself remained the same. Kings, pirates, bishops, and conquerors came here with swords and ambitions, attempting to subjugate this strategic piece of limestone. Yet everyone who tried to ultimately tame Gotland eventually left it, carrying away only ruins, either their own shattered plans or the very walls they had vainly tried to make part of their empires. The Gotlanders themselves have a short but apt answer to all attempts to seize their homeland. The island does not belong to kings, it belongs to the wind and the sea. This is not merely a proud statement, it is a philosophy of survival that allowed the people to preserve themselves through eras of wars and plagues. Over the millennia, dozens of different flags have flown over Visby, but each was merely a temporary guest. True power on Gotland never resided in palaces, it always remained within its ancient stones, in traditions carved into runes and in legends told around evening campfires. And indeed, look at Gotland today, it remains true to itself. Despite all catastrophes, it has not changed its soul. When you step onto this island, you feel that it exists in a rhythm of its own, immune to politics. This is a place where time is measured not by the change of rulers, but by the power of storms and the eternity of the ocean surf. It is an island that allows you to be a guest, but will never become anyone's property. The Runic Code of the Apocalypse. A language that sees through time, stone dialogues with the unknown. We have traveled a long and thorny path from the first seal hunters seeking refuge in caves to the era of royal wars and pirate raids. However, the main secret of Gotland is hidden neither in the gold coins of the Spillings hoard nor in the remains of mighty fortresses that resisted invaders for decades. It stands under the open sky amidst endless fields and coastal meadows. These are the famous Gotland picture stones, majestic stelae covered in engravings that the island's inhabitants themselves still respectfully call conversations with the world. These stones do not merely bear random patterns or scenes from Viking life. They are complex visual codes that the ancestors of the Gotlanders considered sacred, almost magical. Many modern researchers agree that these images are not so much a historical chronicle as an attempt to capture what is fundamentally impossible to describe in ordinary language, moments of the Great Transition, or what we call the end of a cycle in Norse mythology. These stelae acted as access points to the collective memory of the people. They stood amidst the landscape, reminding travelers that their every step was part of a larger plan determined by gods and fate. Each line, each figure of a warrior or ship on the stone is a separate hieroglyph conveying not just an event, but the emotional state of the person who created it. Researchers suggest that some engravings were encrypted messages that were activated only at a certain position of the sun, forcing the reader to reflect on the inevitability of time. This was their language, a way to see through the thickness of time. They did not record history merely to preserve it. They attempted to warn descendants that change is the natural state of the universe. For a Viking, the end of the world was not a catastrophe but a necessary transformation, and these stones were their guide through this process. The myth of the end of the cycle, Ragnarok frozen in stone. Among the endless interweaving of Gotland ornaments, a special place is held by symbols that researchers secretly call Ragnarok codes. For the Vikings, the end of the world was not a finale in our understanding. It was not a complete destruction, but a necessary, brutal cleansing of the world through fire and water. The engravings on the stones become true manifestos of this belief. On them we see ships that, ignoring the laws of gravity, sail straight into the sky, and warriors whose souls leave their bodies to become bright stars in the night firmament. There is an ancient legend that on one of the most inaccessible and time-damaged stones, the true date of what they called the Great Sunset is hidden. It is not just numbers, it is a runic canvas intentionally created to remain invisible to the ordinary human eye. Only during the winter solstice, when sunlight falls upon the stone at a critically narrow angle, do the shadows from microscopic indentations form into runes that indicate the arrival of a new cycle. This transforms every such stele into a kind of astronomical clock. The Vikings did not wait for death, they waited for the moment when the wheel of history would complete a full turn. These images symbolize the transition of souls into the halls of Odin, where they will wait for the final battle. Each figure of a warrior on the stone is a manifestation of the belief that death on the battlefield is merely a way to take one's place in the heavenly army. This is not simply art, it is a deeply intellectual attempt by the Vikings to reconcile themselves with the inevitable end of all existence. They believed that by carving this moment into stone, they gained a particle of control over destiny. And as long as these stelae stand on Gotland, they continue to broadcast this message. The end of the world is not a verdict, but a transition for which one must be prepared, even if the price of this is the complete disappearance of the old world. Why the runes speak, memory technology for future civilizations. Today we are often inclined to endow Gotland's runes with mystical, even esoteric meaning, perceiving them as a code to unknown knowledge. However, for those who held the chisel 1,000 years ago, it was not magic, but memory technology. Every strike against the limestone was a desperate yet confident attempt to stop the relentless moment and make it eternal, tearing it from the clutches of oblivion. These stones speak to us about the end of the world not because they are harbingers of the apocalypse, but because for the Vikings, time was not a straight line leading nowhere. It was a circle, an ideal geometric figure where everything that has a beginning inevitably has its finale only to begin again. The island's final message: when you stand before these silent sentinels under the cold Baltic wind, you finally understand why Gotland could never be completely conquered or assimilated. These engravings are not simply cultural monuments, they are a manifesto of human stubbornness carved into stone. They remain an unchangeable reminder in the face of epidemics, pirate raids, or the political games of monarchs. There exist truths that neither time nor war can destroy. Gotland teaches us the main thing: we may lose wealth, fortresses, and even power itself, but we will never lose our ability to leave traces. These runes are a dialogue between the past and the future, where the island acts not just as a backdrop, but as an active witness that life is a constant struggle worth recording. Gotland stands as long as its stones stand, and as long as we are capable of hearing their silent voice, the history of humanity continues. The island that looks to the future, an invitation to reflect. Today, Gotland is a quiet, almost meditative corner of Sweden where people from all over the world come to find peace and escape the noise of modernity. But if you stop for a moment and listen to the wind wandering among the limestone cliffs, you will hear the distant roar of Raukars and the whispers of those who carved their messages to eternity into stone 1,000 years ago. The world is changing at an incredible speed. Borders shift, technologies age, and empires become memories. Yet the runes on Gotland continue to speak to anyone ready to hear them. They remind us of a fundamental truth: history is not a frozen past, but a tool with which we prepare for the future. Your voice matters. Thank you for traveling this path to the heart of the Baltic with me. If this journey has touched your curiosity, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. There are many more mysteries ahead, hidden under layers of dust and time. Which of Gotland's legends struck you the most? Perhaps it is the story of the holy ram that pointed the way, or the enigma of the 67 kilograms of silver left for the gods. Write in the comments, share your thoughts, and we will certainly analyze the most interesting one in future videos. Remember, the island's history continues as long as we continue to ask questions. Thanks for watching, my friend. Don't forget to watch our other videos and learn new mysteries. We have a lot more interesting things in store for you. Join the Gothic horizon. History is not just what is behind us, it is what remains hidden in the shadows. From forgotten tales and ancient ruins to places where reality bends and reason fades, subscribe to explore the edges of the world. Join us on the horizon where the darkness tells its own story. Leave your questions and wishes in the comments. What should we tell you about next time?